Well, hello everyone, and welcome to our inaugural episode of Godzilla4Fans. And today, I will be your MC. I'm Eddie G. And over to my metaphorical right, I have my friend P-Dog.
Hello, Pat Nagan here.
All right. And to my metaphysical left, I have my friend Rich Dresden. How are you doing, gentlemen?
Well, I'm okay.
All your base are belong to me. You are on way to destruction.
What you say?
Okay.
You have no chance to survive. Make your time.
No. We've made this time, and we've made this time to talk about Godzilla films. And tonight, since I am Master of Ceremonies, I've decided we are going to discuss Gojira and Godzilla, King of the Monsters. Because we're better to start than the beginning.
Yes.
So, yes. Gojira and Godzilla, King of the Monsters are essentially the same film, but with some important differences. And Gojira is a real landmark film in Japanese cinema. It also pretty much was the genesis of not just the Godzilla franchise, but kaiju eiga worldwide.
Yes.
Of course, there were monster movies before that, but that really just kind of exploded it. Now, in Gojira, our film starts with a boat being sunk mysteriously.
Blending flesh or light.
And eventually, the survivors of that boat sinking end up washed up on shore and tell stories about a terrible monster attacking their ship.
Oh, yeah.
And then, what do you know? The island they're on gets almost destroyed in a storm.
The sailors are picked up by a fishing crew from Odo, and then the fishermen who picked them up, they're attacked by Godzilla, essentially.
Yeah, I guess I might have been jumping ahead a little bit.
Yeah.
But the characters of our film go to research this, and they discover the giant monster, Godzilla, and now they have to figure out how to deal with it.
Because, I mean, and it's so funny how all of this plays out in the film and how it was playing out for the filmmakers as they were making the film. Because a lot of what they learned how to do, they learned on the fly. Because nobody had made a movie quite like this before in Japan. I mean, there had been, these big samurai epics. I mean, most notably Musashi Miyamoto and Seven Samurai, which came out both the same year. And the former of which, Musashi Miyamoto, won the Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean,
that was Seven Samurai. No,
it wasn't. I checked, but still close enough. Toho was, and in some ways still is, the Warner Brothers of Japan. They made all different types of films, were very successful at it, and then all of a sudden comes this giant monster movie that, is definitely, it's a big gamble, but it's exciting enough for, these guys to want to attempt it. Especially on the part of special effects director E.G. Tsuburaya. Now, what he was doing was not exactly new, but it was new for Japan because, I mean, it's like, if they needed to recreate the bombing of Pearl Harbor, he was the go-to guy for, any type of special effects. Huge King Kong fan, and he had his own print of the film, which back in those days they didn't have, movies on DVD or downloadable online, whether legally or illegally. We're going to be agnostic about that. But Godzilla was a learn-as-you-go production. Takes, injuries. There was a man in a suit who played Godzilla. There was also an assortment of hand puppets for some of the
trousers.
Yeah, I mean, the Godzilla suit itself was a perfect example of, the film being learn as you go, because it was just, there was no way that they were going to do stop motion.
I understand that was the original idea, was to have these creatures do stop motion more, as we know from Winsor McKay. I'm pronouncing that wrong.
Well, no, Willis O'Brien.
Willis O'Brien?
But Winsor McKay, he's somebody that we'll get to at some point, because...
He's dirty, right?
Well, yeah, Winsor McKay brought Gertie the Dinosaur to the animated screen in 1914. And I think that was probably the first time that anybody had portrayed dinosaurs on film, which is how eventually we got to Godzilla. But E.G. Tsuburaya estimated that if they used stop motion, then Godzilla would have taken about 7 years to complete, rather than, a mere 3 to 4 months. They had to get it into production and get it into theaters. And, Haru Nakajima, who I think both of us, and I think maybe you had told a story about meeting him.
No, unfortunately, I did not have the pleasure to meet Haru Nakajima.
He's still around. He's still around,
Yes.
Fingers crossed. I shook hands with Godzilla. That was really something. The man who played Godzilla is still alive. He's 87 years old.
Oh, bless him.
He
Good.
loves meeting new fans. You can tell it without having to speak a word of Japanese.
Yeah.
Now, Nakajima portrayed Godzilla for what, 20 years?
Almost 20, yeah. He portrayed him in 12 films, alternating with their actors if, they were short a person or somebody else got injured and they couldn't perform a stunt. So there goes Nakajima, into the Rodan suit or the Mothra suit. Yes.
Well, I'm looking over here at my notes, and of course, Nakajima is the famous Godzilla actor.
Oh, yeah.
But we have the other gentleman, Katsumi Tezuka, who was also Godzilla.
Mm-hmm. He's credited in Gojira as being an assistant. From the commentaries and documentaries that I've listened to, Katsumi Tezuka performed in the suit first and passed out on the first day of filming.
Wow.
It's been speculated that only Nakajima's work ended up on film, but that could be egos going around. Who knows? Because if you look at some of the photos from that time, and at least the person presenting the photographs, they're like, Katsumi Tezuka, Nakajima thought of Tezuka as more of his assistant or apprentice. And it's kind of funny because Tezuka was old enough to be Nakajima's father.
Yeah.
Apparently,
he would end up being in a couple of different suits.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think he played Kong, correct?
I don't know about Kong, but I understand he was Anguirus in Raids.
Yes.
He was Mogera and the Mysterians. And he was even the unbelievable Varan in Varan the Unbelievable.
Yeah. As was Nakajima. And, oh, man. He almost got neutered while playing Varan.
Oh, yeah. Well, maybe that's a story to share when we do an episode of Varan.
Yeah.
But that's, you were talking about how this was really a learn as you go along process.
Yes.
That first suit, what was it, made of fiberglass?
Oh, no. Oh, God.
The first suit was made of something that was literally...
Well, Gigan, the claws were originally fiberglass.
Okay, that's what I'm confusing it with. But that first suit was so stiff and unwieldy.
PVC something.
Well, not PVC. That's totally rigid. You can't move that at all. And I mean, the place that I work at, we have a vendor that prints on PVC.
It was a latex material, right?
Yeah, it was foam latex, which was of a very crude grade because we also have to understand, certain building supplies were not really available in Japan. During the post-war period, and even though the occupation forces had left, there wasn't a lot of importing going on in Japan. I think, also because of some embargo, and we don't want to do business with the Japanese and stuff like that. But I tell you, there were certain things in history not worth exploring, just knowing that we lived through it, and more importantly, they lived through it. And
although what was going on in history at the time was influential on the film itself.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The atom bomb was a big concern, and it wasn't so much that people were killed by it. It's just to what extent is this kind of power going to be taken to be nuclear war? Will it really, truly annihilate us all? Or is it going to create more monsters like Godzilla? And, of course, Toho built a franchise around shit. being that the suit was made of, this really stiff material, it wasn't exactly stiff at first. It was made out of foam latex, and in some cases, on the interior anyway, there were bamboo rods to help it stand up. Yeah, I mean that just floors me, because just imagine all the abrasions that you would come home with at the end of the day, and especially the rubber itself was of such a crude grade that it would harden. These were shot. This film was shot on indoor sound stages.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And because during summer, the film came out in November. The heat in there caused the stuff to. I'm surprised it didn't melt, but that could be a totally different story. And adding insult to injury, I mean, the suit weighed about 220 pounds. And if you see Nakajima in person, he's older. Nakajima's like maybe at best like 5'3" or 5'4", and probably weighs about 120 pounds. That's a lot to carry. I mean, it's like you're carrying your weight and then some.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But he was able to do it. He could only be in the suit for maybe 10, 15 minutes at a time. But of course, they had to keep going. They had to keep filming. And they built 2 suits at first. Well, the one Jessica had passed out in was unfortunately not really usable. And then there was the second one, which, was fitted more for Nakajima, I guess. And
now, the first suit, didn't that end up getting sawed in half?
I think it was that one. I mean, Soup would know better than any of us. But yeah, at least one of them was sawn in half and used for some of the lower angle shots.
So essentially, we ended up with a pair of Godzilla trousers.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's like Wallace and Gromit, the wrong trousers. More like the very wrong trousers. Yeah. But at least he was able to see through it, because other than 3 holes that were punched into the neck, you really couldn't see inside that suit. I mean, if you look at it very closely, and I mean, we can only see it in pictures, because that suit doesn't even exist as far as I know. Yeah, I mean, you don't hear about it, you don't read about it, and when they kept making more and more of these movies, they kept making
recycling suits,
pre-existing
suits. Yeah,
well, this is something
like
we'll probably talk about in the future, but these suits would get repurposed or refurbished for other monsters and other reasons. I even remember a joke being that in one of the films was, all right, today we have to blow up the suit, but tomorrow we have to finish filming with it. So they blow up the suit one day just to make another one to film with later, instead of blowing up the suit when they're done doing all the filming. But suits weren't the only thing. They also had a Godzilla puppet that they used for a number of different shots.
I think they had like 2 or 3 of them. There was a story that was told about Ishiro Honda, how meticulous he was about his sets while he was filming. In between takes, he would.
Was it Honda or Subaraya?
Honda in particular, I heard this. I think it's on the Criterion Godzilla Blu-ray. He would go up to the miniature sets, and or even the full scale ones, and if something needed to be painted slightly, he would just go brush if there was one laying around and just fix this, fix the leaves on the trees. He was very much about continuity, and again, no rewind. There was no playback or any of that. They were shooting on 35mm film. You don't get to really see these results like played back until you develop the film, make a negative, and then make a print. So it was really, no matter what way you went about it, it was just, you make the take, you print the takes, you view the rushes and hope that you got everything. And he would say that the Godzilla suit, as good as it was, didn't really look good when it photographed from certain angles. So that's why they employed the hand puppet. And they employed the hand puppet with the idea that it would be good for some angles, but not good for all. During one of the scenes of mass destruction, particularly when the clock tower is tower is destroyed. You see Godzilla turning ever so slightly, and then he starts roaring, and we cut to the clock tower, and then we cut back to Godzilla, who's now roaring at the clock tower. That's all the hand puppet. When he actually destroys the clock tower, that's Nakajima. Yeah, but I mean that hand puppet. But when it turns its face around, it's got this big, goofy Ninja Turtles looking.
Yeah. Almost like the teeth are pointing out in the wrong directions.
Yeah.
And that's actually our first look at Godzilla, is the puppet.
Yes.
That scene where everyone's running up the mountain to see the animal.
Oh yeah.
And then our first look at it is that puppet head coming up over the mountain.
And I mean that puppet looked pretty damn good. I guess it's probably because we saw it at that particular angle where we didn't see Michelangelo.
Yeah.
Because that's what goes through my head now. I mean, it's like it's a very somber movie, and then all of a sudden Michelangelo shows up. Holy snap!
Camera.
Yes, yeah. I do remember I was tasked with the work of saying, theoretically, how would I improve the Godzilla movies that I like? And that was one of the things that I said, was that I would not have used that hand puppet
Same here.
at any point during the film. I would have had it been synced at all times.
Yeah.
But I guess that's not always exactly feasible when you're going through the work of filming.
Yeah, and also at that time, I mean, this is all new. There were no animatronics that were available. Any of the trains that you see in the film that are miniatures are pulled by wires, cables. The tail in the Godzilla suit was operated entirely by manual wires. And I mean the suit itself, there was very little open and close action. That's why they employed the hand puppet. It was just a lot easier. Either that, or I think there was a way to have like the mandible propped open. Like, I mean, when you see Godzilla roaring in those wonderful shots where he's destroying the electric barrier around Tokyo during the big sequence, that famous sequence of mass destruction. And also, before we get any further from this, let's talk about that scene where we first see Godzilla on Odo Island, up on that hill. Now, we were all, I'd say, huge Godzilla nerds, so we know this. Maybe some other people don't. That scene was going to be portrayed a little bit differently than what we saw in the final film. Yeah. Godzilla was to have a bleeding cow hanging out of his. And I think at one point I had read, and I could be mistaking this for a totally different movie, a dead villager. Obviously, they chose not to go in that direction, so they went with a cow, and a single frame of that exists today. But but supposedly the footage is gone; it no longer exists. And I mean, Tsuburaya became more sensitive a little bit later on about scenes like this disturbing children, because Godzilla had a huge following of the
children,
of the kids. Yeah. But that he felt was just a little too gruesome. And when you see that surviving frame, it's nothing. Godzilla is essentially eating a hamburger before it becomes a hamburger.
Well, I'm kind of glad that decision was made, that they didn't show Godzilla consuming things.
Yeah.
Because that especially worked out well in later films, where we don't worry too much about the biology of Godzilla, where we get more into the character of Godzilla. So if we got to sit there and think, like, how is a creature this massive able to keep itself fed without starving to death? That can be a serious distraction. Although that could also be a very interesting story point
concept
in the film. But I think it's better off that they didn't worry too much about that, because then we can focus more on the idea of Godzilla, more so than some sort of biological aspect of him.
Yes.
And honestly, I really don't like the idea of Godzilla going around eating people.
Yeah, neither do I.
Yeah. It didn't work in Geno. It's not going to work here.
No.
Yeah. And I mean, we'll talk about that at a later date.
Yeah.
What makes this film work is the fact that, of course, you have this giant monster that's a major selling point. But what I think, and maybe you guys will agree, what doesn't film really get a lot of its due credit is the human cast. And what a human cast we have in this film.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
My God. We've got Momoko Koshi, who plays Emiko Yamane. Her father is played by the great character actor Takashi Shimura, who was one of the leaders of Seven Samurai.
Yeah, yeah.
And we have, as Dr. Serizawa, the great Akihiko Hirata, who would appear in so many other Godzilla films. Unfortunately, not as Dr. Serizawa for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
But, it's like every time he shows up in a Godzilla movie, and you've seen as many of these films as we have, it's always nice to find a friendly face. And the same is true also of Akira Takarada. The great story about him was he was first billed in the cast. So if movies have taught us anything, if you're top billed in the cast, that means you're the star. And he was groomed for these domestic dramas or whatever. He was a graduate of this school that Toho had of young up and coming actors.
Yes.
And he earned the nickname whatever translates into Mr. Handsome. So he arrived for filming.
I remember that was also the case of Momoko Kochi. She was also in that Young Face program as well, as where they picked her up.
Yeah, that's what it was called, the Young Face program. And he shows up for filming, and what's kind of funny at this point, nobody knows what kind of movie Godzilla is. It was that, under lock and key.
Yeah, hush.
But he shows up. He's like, "Hi, I'm Akira Takarada, and I'm the star of Godzilla." And they kind of look at him, and then they look back. They look at each other. They look back at him. And they're like, "Oh no, Godzilla's the star." And then he finds out what Godzilla is. And he was eating humble pie the rest of the day. He's like, "Okay, don't assert yourself when you don't need to."
Well, if we're going to call anyone the male lead, it would be him.
Yeah.
And he would show up in dozens of other Godzilla movies.
Ooh, yeah.
A lot of Toho's pictures he would show up in, and he also had a lot of television.
Yes. The television I'm not as familiar with.
Yes. Yeah. And he's still alive and kicking as of today. Yeah. And I also think he showed up even in really later Godzilla films. After 2000, he showed up in cameos.
He showed up in
Final Wars.
Mm-hmm.
He showed up in Godzilla vs. Mothra, the 90s one.
Yeah. He was there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He was there.
And even Miss Kochi ends up in Destroyer, reprising her role.
Yeah, and shortly after that, she passed away.
Yeah.
Yeah, she had cancer, I think. I'm not sure what kind of cancer, but Takarada, I believe, was filmed for Godzilla 2014, but his scenes ended up on the cutting room floor. To what extent he was in the film, I don't know.
He was just apparently he was just some dude at Hawaiian Air.
Well, even Nakajima and Tezuka would end up making cameos in the films as human characters as well.
Yeah,
they're kind of, if you blink, you miss it, but they're in there.
Yeah, they play reporters. Nakajima is a reporter handling phones, and Tezuka plays the editor in that sequence for Hagiwara, who would later more or less be rewritten for Raymond Burr. Raymond Burr's character in Godzilla King of the Monsters.
Well, since you brought him up, maybe now's as good a time to start talking about King of the Monsters and the differences.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, at first, when I saw Gojira for the first time, because if all of us saw these films in our youth, and at one time we saw, the first Godzilla, King of the Monsters was what we saw.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, there's this thing that went around that it's like, you're not a purist unless you've seen it in its original form, but it was very hard to get outside of the United States until it came out on DVD.
2004.
Format, because VHS is...
Yeah, and I still have a bunch of my Japanese bootlegs of all the Godzilla films.
Exactly.
But yeah, we had Mr. Raymond Burr playing the character of Steve Martin in I guess we call it the Americanized version of Gojira, which would get the name Godzilla, which was a bit of a stretch to go from Gojira to Godzilla, but somehow it happened.
But who came up with the name? We're talking about Godzilla and Gojira. Who came up with the word Godzilla?
That's a really good question. And the answer is, we don't know. That's the easy answer anyway.
Uh-huh.
We don't know. The general consensus tends to be that it was a combination of people and a combination of stories, which makes what we're doing all the more worthwhile to try to explore, because I don't think there's just one story on how the name Godzilla came about. There's several. And I mean, that could even be for another podcast, but in short, there's the gorilla whale story, because the word Gojira is Goji, gorilla, and Kujira, which is whale. So gorilla whale, if you want to believe that story, go right ahead. Personally, I like it. That's my favorite one. The other story
Also makes for good fan art.
Yeah, the other story that's been told, a Toho stagehand, who's this big burly dude who kind of had a nice way about him. They nicknamed him Gojira. The name sort of kind of spun from that. And Haru Nakajima, according to Ed Gatsusevsky, I'm sorry if I'm butchering his name, and Steve Rifle and friends, had mentioned that Haru Nakajima recalls that they were holding a contest. Toho was holding a contest to name the monster or whatever. And one of the things that came up was Gojira.
That makes a certain amount of sense, because in the future, Toho would do similar things. They would have contests for designing monsters. I don't know if that was actually like submitting scripts or anything, but I know
that's actually how Biollante got made. Somebody, there was a company.
It's so funny, and also, you get into this thing about how does Gojira become Godzilla? I mean, this is a similar argument that we hear from Chief Sonic the Hedgehog programmer Yuji Naka about the name Dr. Robotnik. It was always Dr. Robotnik. It was just somebody over in America took credit for coming up with the name Dr. Robotnik. Well, I'm sure at least maybe 3 or 4 people had taken credit for the name Godzilla, be it Paul Schreibman, be it Edmund Goldman, be it Harold Ross or Richard Kay, but it was always Godzilla. Toho was trying to market Godzilla internationally in 1955, and the international version that was to be prepared, I guess, I don't know this for a fact, it was called Godzilla in other markets, especially in the US, before it became Godzilla King of the Monsters, which we all know today. So
that's interesting.
What we get in that film is we get new scenes with Raymond Burr's character of Steve Martin, sort of edited in to make it seem as if his character was there during the events that just transpired during the film of Gojira, that he was off to the side somewhere doing his reporting as well.
Yeah.
But also what was important about...
Yeah, he takes a very pedestrian view of it, yes.
But his character also ended up knowing almost everybody. Like, he would contact Serizawa at points to try to set up interviews with him. Or he was familiar with the Amanes. I think was he staying with them at any one point? Because I know they visited him in the hospital after the attack.
I don't think
he's brought to the hospital. No, he didn't stay with them.
No, he didn't.
He knew of them.
Oh yeah, he knew of them. He went with them up the hill during the first land attack that Godzilla made, but he wasn't staying with the Yamanis. He was staying some other place.
He was lucky. He got everywhere somehow.
He also got injured, which, of course, is one of the reasons why the film, the majority of which is told in flashback, which ends up being really effective. That's one of the major differences between the American version, King of the Monsters, and the original film, is that it's told in flashback. What was unusual about the construction of the film overall is the fact that when the distributors whose specific business venture was set up around this movie, it was independently financed, produced, distributed, everything by these two guys, Harold Ross and Richard Kay. I believe I'm getting their names right. And Edmund Goldman was one of the sales agents that happened to see this film, and it's a Japanese version, through Toho's Los Angeles office, which opened in 1955. He saw a lot of promise in the film. He had no idea that the people that would ultimately distribute it would dub it into English, number one, and number two, refilm new scenes with an American actor, which also, when you think about it, hadn't really been done before either.
No.
And what was that? We had those scenes we should give some credit to.
Yes.
As directed by Terry Morse.
Yeah.
Who was...
he was known as the film doctor.
Mm-hmm. He did a lot of film editing before that.
Oh, yeah.
And even directed a few films on his own.
Yep. He directed a film for Warner Brothers in 1940 that starred, I think, Boris Karloff. I don't have IMDb in front of me because I could get very easily distracted by it. I almost think of that as my film encyclopedia, IMDb. But Terry Morse has a son, Terry Morse Jr., who's also a film editor. And without getting too off topic, Terry Morse Jr. was one of the producers on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: Secret of the Ooze and but he himself is also a film editor, and he sat in on one of the commentaries for the classic media releases of Gojira and Godzilla, King of the Monsters. And it's really nice to hear from somebody who's kind of like right there and remembering some of the work that went into the film, because they didn't have a lot of money.
No.
They didn't have a lot of time, just like the original film, to get this made and get it into theaters. Total cost of filming all of Raymond Burr's scenes was somewhere in the realm of like $25,000, and getting the rights from Toho was, I think, another $5 or $10,000, which in those days, was a decent deal, I guess.
Yeah.
But I mean, even $10,000 would be stretching it for an independent distributor, without major studio distribution, who's just taking a non-English speaking film and essentially refilming it. Only about 2 or 3 voice actors were employed to perform the dubbing of the Japanese characters. What ends up making it very effective is that there are some scenes in which, and it's usually when Steve Martin's character is present in those scenes, some of the dialogue is left in Japanese, and one of the characters who's alongside Raymond Burr is there interpreting.
Yeah.
I mean, that kind of made Terry Morse's job a little bit easier, I guess you could say. But at the same time, he was prepared to deal with any challenge that came about.
Well, I imagine there were quite a number of them that ended up happening.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot, like you kept saying, that a lot of this was kind of learn as you went along.
Yeah. And also, I mean, if you were dubbing, you would go into a studio, and you would do what's called looping. And essentially what that means, for those of you who have no idea what that means, you look at footage of dubbing over and over again, and you just read the lines on the sheet that have been translated, and you match up your lip movements as best as possible while making it make sense. And if you get the opportunity to improvise, well, you improvise. And that's why banana oil was invented.
Banana oil.
We'll get to that at some point.
Yes.
But what's really strange, though, in the case of this film, King of the Monsters, there was no looping. They just basically went into a booth. They read what was on the page. They did the best they could to bring out the performances of the characters. And the rest, Morse just kind of filled in with his editing expertise. I mean, long shots can really help.
Yeah.
Especially if the movements don't always match. There was one guy who did a lot of the male voices. His name was Sammy Tong. And unfortunately, he wasn't very well at the time. I think he was in and out of work. He had been having some mental problems, even ended up committing suicide. I'm not sure if he was also blacklisted at some point, or just being a communist, but I mean, this was the 50s. Anything was possible. And even in '56 when this came out, this was like the post-McCarthy era still.
Yeah.
I'm glad that you mentioned that, 56,
Mm-hmm.
because at that time, Raymond Burr had already been in film for a number of years.
Oh yeah.
Did lots of theater, radio,
TV shows.
and television. He was, of course, famous for
It was
the
Perry
Perry
Mason.
Mason character, for Ironside,
Ironside. Yep.
and what was it, Hitchcock's film Rear Window?
Rear Window, yes. He was one of the villains in that.
Was a big
He was
deal
also,
for him.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, he was coming off of that, and it certainly, when this did come out, it made Ross and Kay and Goldman a nice piece of change. The investment, was about $35,000, and Godzilla King of the Monsters grossed $2 million. So, I mean, come on, that's nothing to sneeze at.
So
that's really nothing to sneeze.
you know film a lot better than I do. So you think maybe having this established actor, Raymond Burr,
Oh yeah.
who is a known thing and has some star power behind him, do you think that helped legitimize Godzilla King of the Monsters?
That's a very good question. I mean, Raymond Burr was not a household name.
Okay.
I mean, calling him a star was a stretch, but he was an actor that people knew if they were regular moviegoers, because when you went to the movies back in the 50s and before that, I mean, you paid a quarter, 50 cents, $1, whatever, and you didn't just see one film. In some cases, there would be a double feature. There would be a whole program of entertainment. You'd probably be at the movies all day if your dollar afforded you that. And I mean, you could see up to two movies, a few cartoons, a chapter from a serial. Although by the mid-50s, those were because television. There would be race night shorts, in which, well, I mean, it's not exactly appropriate to discuss them in this broadcast, but essentially, you would have the races, you get a number, and if your horse won, then you got a prize.
Okay.
And I guess they would probably change the endings or something. But I mean, at least the way that my grandmother told it, on Saturday you had the races.
All right.
So yeah. The movies was going to the movies was like a social gathering. You went out to the movies. You went out, maybe even dressed up, because it's an experience.
Right. It's not how it is now, sort of a two-hour distraction or so. It was actually more of an event.
Yeah. I mean, there weren't commercials just trying to sell you random crap. It wasn't, previews for TV shows, which, wait a minute, you're telling me about television, but I'm at the movies. I mean, the two of them go hand in hand, but at the same time, it's more about product placement than anything else. And a whole bunch of god-awful trailers, but we could keep going on and on about that.
But no, I think we'd rather stay on the topic of the actors.
Of course.
Now,
Yeah.
I've suggested that maybe Raymond Burr brought some legitimacy to the film, but you're saying that's kind of a stretch. He wasn't exactly a big star name.
He wasn't a star name. I mean, he certainly gave a great performance, but I think, what definitely helped Godzilla register an impact was the fact that this was, and I mean, there were a lot of atomic monster movies that were coming out. Godzilla was just one of the first batch. In 1953, there was a film called Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, which the producer of the Godzilla films, Tomoyuki Tanaka, credited as one of the most direct inspirations for Godzilla, was having seen that film. Some of the elements are there, but otherwise Godzilla...
Giant monster awakened by a nuclear test.
Yep.
Prehistoric monster awakened, yeah. That's pretty much... Beast from 20,000 Fathoms is basically Godzilla before it was Godzilla.
I guess you could say that. The name Godzilla begs a lot of questions, and plus a poster with a giant fire-breathing monster on it, would arouse a lot of people's curiosities. I mean, Raymond Burr is really the icing on the cake.
Okay.
Answers your question quite the way in which you were expecting, but I did my best.
Well, as presumptuous of it was me to suggest Raymond Burr,
Sure.
The real star power there would be Takashi Shimura. So in the same way, I'm wondering if to Japanese audiences, was
Yes.
having him, this again, this really established actor who would be in some of Japan's most influential films,
Yes.
being Godzilla. Did he also help legitimize this concept of this giant monster and take it into something more serious and somber, as opposed to something that could have been goofy or just another action movie?
Absolutely. Absolutely, he brought a lot of legitimacy to this project. And it wasn't even just, from a financial standpoint. It was more or less an internal thing. A lot of the actors, all of the actors who were in scenes together, the ensembles, the scenes with him, Emiko, and Ogata, everyone gravitates towards him. And they react to each other. It all feels natural. Even if we're of a different culture, we can still see that this man has power, he has influence, he has respect. I could say he demands respect, but, he's got everybody's respect. Everyone is turning to him because he may have the answers.
Well, that's in part his character. His character of Dr. Yamane he's actually related to most of them. One of them is his daughter.
Yes.
And the other one is his soon-to-be son-in-law. So
yes.
he's a patriarchal figure. They look to him for guidance and for advice, especially since he's the expert.
Yep. And in real life, he was that kind of actor that, people could gravitate towards. He was seasoned, he was experienced, and from what I have heard, he wasn't like, one of these egomaniacs that would just go on the set and be like, where the hell's my trailer? He was there to work.
That does make some sense, because when we were talking earlier, you mentioned that Kochi and Hirata were relatively new. They came from that Fresh Faces, Young Faces program. So having this established actor there, of course, I guess it makes certain sense that he sort of be like a lead figure for them to look up towards and to be inspired by and encouraged by.
Yes, absolutely. And that's what that's where all the great performances come from. It's not just acting, it's reacting. And Morgan Freeman expressed that beautifully in an interview while promoting $1 Million Baby about the same time that Godzilla was re-released in the States for its 50th anniversary. It's all about, working together. It's about being in a different place. But you don't just go there. You have to feel it. Because when it's over, it's over. It's all make-believe. But, your job as an actor is to treat it like it exists. If it exists, it's real. And there we go. Godzilla. Definitely Shimura brought a lot of legitimacy to the role, to the film. Hirata definitely, his performance, whether he was famous or not, that's more research to be done. But people certainly knew of him in Japan.
Okay.
I'm sure. He was in quite a few things. And his performance is probably the most dominating in the film because it's so profound what he ends up doing. And he's only in a few scenes when you really think about it. And in both versions. He's in very few scenes, but he registers probably about as powerful an impact as Godzilla himself. Here's this guy who's a brilliant scientist, but he comes upon this powerful weapon that even he doesn't know how to stomach. You fear his invention, but at the same time you sympathize with him because do the right thing. But at the same time, the longer he puts off making a decision of whether or not to offer to the military to potentially destroy Godzilla, the more people are getting hurt, and the problem is still there. And
that would end up becoming a theme in several Godzilla films, is mankind having to be responsible for the things they create or the world around them.
Yes.
So they, in the case of the films, it literally leads to monsters. That could threaten our existence.
Like Ghidra.
Well, Hedorah especially, I think. Like, if we're going to talk about a monster that could end the world, that's one of them. But maybe that's another topic for another day.
And a fun one.
So yeah, we get back to Serizawa and his device, the oxygen destroyer. and he's worried that this thing could become a terrible weapon.
Oh yeah.
And that plays right alongside what ended up being the discovery of the atomic weapon. The atomic bomb ended up becoming this amazingly powerful thing
Oh yeah.
that even though only 2 of them have ever been used in warfare, the specter of that
Oh yeah.
felt pretty much over the entire world.
Yeah. And I mean, Japan at that time, they were the only civilization on planet Earth to have
Nukes dropped on them.
actually been attacked using nuclear weapons. I mean, they experienced that shit firsthand. That's nothing to sneeze about. Yeah, they were the enemy.
And that does play into the film.
Oh yeah.
Now,
But
it
at
may
the
be
same
more of an
time, you know, I
undertone
mean,
in the film, but it does play out.
And I mean, on one hand, it's like, you know, they're the enemy during World War II, but I mean, it's like they're not our enemy after that. And it's like you kind of sympathize with the fact that, yeah, you know, I mean, there were some people that were very badly disfigured, you know, from the after effects of that bomb. The people obviously killed. That's horrible. But at the same time, no, you're and this was another prevalent problem at that time. You know, I mean, it's like you see what it does, but what else can it do? I mean, it's like, where do we go from here? You know, you have, you know, some very striking evidences to the power of this weapon, but then you hear about people that are being almost kind of indirectly. You know, you got people sprouting third arms and third eyes and other sorts of hideous things, and you wonder, you know, it's like, is it really so bad that it's worse, or is it really so worse that it's like, I feel like I'm going in circles, but you kind of get what I'm going for. Yeah.
So as a result of these powerful inventions, these weapons, these tools that we learn how to create, we have to learn to also be responsible for them. And I think that's part of what the Godzilla film was about, but also what Serizawa's character was about.
Yes.
He's at this crossroads in his life. He was in the war. That's where he was scarred.
Yeah, they don't say it explicitly, but you can just tell.
And now it's the end of that. And he's got to make this decision. Does he offer up his secret in the hopes that it can stop this horrible monster? And even if it does or doesn't, what happens after that?
I mean, it's some really heady stuff. And I mean, even when I watch the film today, I mean, I first saw the original cut, Gojira, back in 2004. And I remember seeing King of the Monsters as early as 1992, but I saw it for the first time all the way through in about 1993 or 4. Both versions, you know, say what you want that well, not you guys, but there are some people out there that say that King of the Monsters is, you know, the inferior film. I think the two are pretty evenly matched. You know, I'm not just saying that. Yeah. I'm not just saying that because, you know, King of the Monsters is that's where this started. That's why we have had the privilege of seeing these films outside of Japan, is because of that film. It was the introduction of Godzilla to the outside world. And it was also that version that just about every other country in the world had seen Godzilla, because it was dubbed into, like, I think 12 different languages and made it as far as Italy.
And isn't there stories about a colorized version that came out of Italy?
I haven't. Want to drop episodes in the future and try to watch it without having a heart attack? I'm all for it. I'd say, yeah, let's do it. Maybe not the acid, but, oh yeah, I think the movie will provide its own acid. Just saying. It's, oh boy. I mean, even just describing how Luigi Cozzi producing that version is the topic for like half an episode.
Well, maybe one day we'll look into some of the unusual distribution effects of Godzilla, because as I understand it, in many of the German versions of Godzilla films, Dr. Frankenstein is either directly responsible for the monsters or somehow indirectly responsible for them being involved in the stories.
Well, I mean, to that extent, I'm not exactly sure about, but I mean, on the posters, oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, James Rolfe.
We could probably ramble on for another hour or so about these wonderful movies. But Rich, Patrick, do you have any final thoughts for Gojira and King of the Monsters that you'd like to share with us?
My final thoughts would say, like, the world would be a lot more boring if we didn't have Godzilla. Godzilla makes the world go round. Or life's interesting with Godzilla.
the Godzilla makes the world go round and stop whenever possible so that he can get off and get more cotton candy. My final thoughts on Godzilla is I do a weekly webcomic called Lucky-Zilla. It is about a superhero. I won't get into too much of it. He's this guy. And had it not been for Godzilla, I don't know if I ever would have created this character because he's become such a big part of my life. Every now and again, it's nice to revisit Godzilla and remind myself why I'm still doing Lucky-Zilla.
Mm-hmm.
And in the process, this film and the others that followed, both good and bad, there is just so much to appreciate in these films.
Exactly.
Especially, considering that it started out, as an allegory, for nuclear war. I mean, both versions of this film, love or hate, whichever you love or hate, it's a fantastic piece of cinema that has stood the test of time, and I can only hope that the current generation of Godzilla fans can help pass it along to the next generation of Godzilla fans.
Well said.
So that's as much of my final thoughts as I can really come up with.
All right. Well, let me close it out by saying a little bit as well. As a young kid, my friends knew me as the Godzilla guy. That was part of my identity. That was part of my character, my personality.
Sure.
These films helped shape my love of the strange and the unusual, and helped me build a lot of bonds of friendship. Whether it was with other serious Godzilla fans like the two of you that are really passionate about it, whether it was just kind of my friends who are casually interested in it just because, it's a movie about a big monster. Even the people who didn't care for Godzilla, knowing me that I liked it, sort of helped us become friendly together.
Sure.
In the movie Stephen King's It, I don't remember the characters' names. I'm even worse with actors. But one of them is a stand-up comedian.
Oh, God.
Yes. And he's doing a joke about how much power could have the power company have? What could they possibly do? And then he says, well, in the Godzilla movies, tanks and missiles and bombs and planes, they do nothing to stop the monster. But sure enough, the power company sets up some electrical wires, and he's going around, oh! And all my friends kind of like turn and look at me. Like, that's why you like that movie. That's why you like the movie, isn't it, Ed? Because this guy's talking about Godzilla. That's my final thought about Godzilla and Gojira, is that they may not be the ones that I remember most fondly.
Sure.
But they're the beginning of all of this.
Yeah.
And they're also the beginning of this. This podcast, even in part, our friendship is a result of these movies.
Yes, absolutely. 100%.
Godzilla for world peace.
All right, everybody.
Well, that's later on in the series. We could spoil
Godzilla
it
4, The Quest for Peace.
Oh man. They did make 4 Superman movies with Christopher, didn't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, they did.
2.5 of them are good. Yeah. Jesus Christ.
I think it's about time for us to start signing off.
All right.
But next time, I think we'll let our friend Rich Dresden here MC for us,
Okay.
and he will direct sort of the conversation and the topic for us. Do you have an idea of what you would like to do next time, Rich, or will we let that be a surprise?
For right now, I'm going to say it's going to be a surprise. At the same time, I'm also thinking to myself, when you've started at the beginning, you could either go all the way end, or you could just inch your way up, and I'm going to roll the dice. I rolled a 1, and maybe we'll go on to Godzilla Raids again.
All right.
And,
Well,
all
thank
the
you, gentlemen.
distractions. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, good sir.
All right. Well, and thank you for everyone who was willing to listen to us pontificate about this wonderful film that we all enjoy. All right. So, saying goodbye and saying good night.
Good night.
Take care, everybody.
Good night. Good luck.
Take care.